Go big or go home, they said. And now, I've got the blues. So, let me tell you a little story. See, there was a time when I was a reasonable man. It was a time before the WideFox. The WideFox has caused my ego to get a little crazy, to want 315s square on each corner. Now, in the ever pursuit of changing suspension to match a 315 tire, what that means is what I have today, it's not going to work. So all the Fox stuff that I reused in the Eibach Sportline springs and that, while they might have worked for a 225 to a 245, a 315, not going to play nice. So one of the things this week is I've got to change the suspension back out. Now the Sportline springs, they will get me through this year to get the car running, but long term, they are not going to put up with the amount of traction that a 315 tire is going to offer. So when you go from a tire like this to a tire like this, lowering springs are not going to handle that at all. So what I'm going to have to change on this front suspension is going to be the lower control arms and the sway bar and the steering arms for the inner and outer tie rods, basically. All of that is going to go in here now, so I've chosen to go to a 99-04 lower control arm, so I'll get rid of the Fox pieces, keep the 94-95 spindles, obviously the brakes go with it, and the shocks I will reuse because I know they bolt up. So all the work you've seen me do so far, well, unfortunately, it's got to all be undone to put on the new lower control arms. So now with all the suspension taken off, the one thing you might be asking yourself is, why? Why would I take apart the front suspension after I've already put it in? So here's what's going on. You can notice on this side is the old Fox lower control arm, and then next to it is the 99-04. If you set them up next to each other, you can see where it mounts to the K-member there at the top of the screen. You can see that the spring perch is about an inch or so out from that. Sway bar mount is, and then the lower control arm or the spindle mount ball joint is also moved out. So what this is going to do by putting on the lower control arm from a 99-04 is that it's going to move everything basically that attaches to the spindle and that out. So basically the wheel and tire is now going to be further out, which makes the car wider, and it actually makes it more, of course the front is going to be wider, but it also makes it more square to the rear, because remember the rear has SN95 axles in it, which are also 3/4 of an inch wide. So the front tires obviously are going to be wider, and that'll make the car corner better once I get better springs in. Now to put these in is pretty easy to go in. Really, since I've already put it in once, I'm not going to show it to you. The only difference to what I did before is that I have to put on the lower ball joint, not the ball joint, but the lower control arm going onto the K-member. Because I'm using the factory ones, the bushings are rubber, so I will put the bolts through, I will snug them down to the point where it's still hanging loose and I can move it back and forth. And then I'm going to assemble everything together prior to securing those down, because I want it to be in what they call laden condition, which means that I want all the weight of the spring and the vehicle together where it's going to be like ride height, so that when I tighten it down, it doesn't put the bushings in a bind, just cause extra wear, and I don't need to do that. Okay, so now to go with the lower control arms once they're all on, I'm also going to change the inner and outer tie rods to match the SN95, because I showed you everything is kind of wider. You also want to take the time now to replace the inner and outer tie rods which are also longer. So if I showed you the outers, of course, obviously the new one to the old one, if I showed you there, pretty similar. The SM95 is actually a little bit shorter, but it's also shorter that way. But just putting on new parts at least gives me good confidence. These are only like $9 or $10, so they're pretty cheap. Now the big difference is going to be your inner tie rod. If I show you on the top, this is SM95. Bottom is the Fox stock piece. Threaded on the inside is the same. So in order to get this off, first thing you want to do is take off your boot. Now, I think on the passenger side, since this has a worm gear on it, I think this boot has been changed before. Normally it's just kind of a band around there that's on there that you can change later on. If you take it back off or anything else, you can just change it to a worm gear. But the piece is just to clamp it over to the body of the steering member, I guess you'd say, or the rack and pinion. So you'll want to take this piece off. Obviously, there's a clamp on the back, which is this. There's a nut also that goes in there. You'll want to get this off. And then this piece itself, this will actually unthread. So there's threads inside here. So you'll unthread this from the rack and pinion steering itself. To take it off, it's pretty easy. Take your time with it. And yeah, I don't know. You thread it on all the way. Once you get to the stop, you shoot in your 3 rivets that goes with it. And pretty simple, honestly. I think it's pretty self-explanatory when you do it. So I'm going to change these real quick and throw these new pieces on and get the rest of the brakes on and get this side done so I can move over to the driver's side. Alright, so with all the suspension done, it is finally time to let you see what wheels I have chosen that will go on the WideFox. So, drum roll. The wheels will be a set of 18-inch Rovos Pretoria. Now these are going to be a 10.5-inch wide wheel. It's off the shelf. I know I had measured for custom wheels and all that, and through some research and that and talking to the really smart guys on suspension and handling at Maximum Motorsports, they recommend going to a square setup. So what I'm going to run are a set of satin black, 18-inch, 10.5 wide with a 315 tire on these, and this will be what WideFox will run. Now, if anything doesn't fit the way I want after I put tires on, I can have the option of adding in spacers. Not real thrilled about that, but I want to make sure everything fits right, nothing rubs. So if I have to run spacers on the front or the back, I'm then going to need to add in longer studs, which means taking the hubs off or the axles out, drilling them out while pressing the studs out, drilling them out, putting new studs in, and all that. Sometimes when you're building a custom car and doing stuff that doesn't really fit off the shelf, you got to do what you got to do to make it work. So that is to be determined, but at least you know now what I've got for a set of wheels. So what do you think? Yay? Nay? Well, if it's nay, they're still going on the car. So, let me just say to this, now that you know the wheels and everything else, this week on the channel, I should have surpassed 1 million views. Now, it's something I've worked for over 8 years on, about 8 and something years about doing. So for me, that's pretty freaking monumental. I know 1 million in today's language isn't exactly a lot, but I'm pretty darn proud of hitting 1 million views on YouTube. And I've got over 2,000 of you fantastic followers and subscribers now that have joined me on the build. So thank you for following me to this point, for joining me on the build. I'm very proud of what the car is. And I will leave you with some views of the WideFox rolling on 18-inch wheels. See you next time.
We about to turn it on. Turn it. We about to turn it on.